I really do want to spend the next 20 minutes talking to you about what I think is possibly the most serious but also undervalued components of our health, and that is stress. So stress is the health epidemic of the 21st century. Now, that's not me who's saying that. Does anyone know who says that? Yeah, maybe the UN does. I've seen it on the World Health Organization website. And I think that's pretty striking statements, because they're not saying that about our poor diets, although that's clearly an issue. They're not saying that about physical inactivity, although that's clearly an issue. But they're saying that about stress. Now, there was a paper published in 2013 in the Journal of the American Medical Association that suggested that between 70 and 90% of what a GP like me sees in any given day is in some way related to stress. Does that surprise you? Yeah, see, and whenever I ask that question, it's always a mix. Half of the people saying, yeah, that's really surprising, half of the people saying no. And for me, when I read it, it was quite surprising until I started to review the patients that came in and had to think about what was driving actually their real health. And the reality is, I think it's true. I think it's spot on. Because as a GP, I see symptoms every day such as insomnia, poor memory, hormonal problems, inability to concentrate, low libido, gut problems, even things like obesity, type 2 diabetes. And actually all of those things, they might seem quite unrelated and quite separate, but you can make a very good case that all of them have stress as a key driver. So why is that? How can stress cause such a diverse range of symptoms? Well, to understand it, you just have to go back maybe 2 million years ago or so when our stress response was evolving. Because once you understand what stress is, you can start to apply that understanding to all the stressful episodes that you might experience in your life and the impacts they're going to have on your body. So let's go back a couple of million years ago. We are in our hunter-gatherer tribe, in our little community, going along with our business, and then there's a predator attacking. Let's say a lion is lurking. So what happens? Well, in an instant, our stress response kicks into gear. A series of physiological changes and biochemical changes all over your body kick in with one goal: to help keep you safe. Right? So what happens? Well, many things happen, but to give you an idea, your blood sugar will start to rise. That's going to help you run faster. That's going to help deliver more glucose to your brain. That's a good thing if you're running away from a lion. What else happens? Your blood pressure goes up. Your blood pressure, again, is going to deliver more oxygen to your brain. That's a good thing. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala. Okay, that's part of your emotional brain. That goes on to high alert. Right? So you're hyper-vigilant for all the threats around you. Again, that's a good thing in the short term. What else happens? Your blood becomes prone to clotting. Right? That means if you were to get cut and attacked by that predator, instead of bleeding to death, your blood's going to clot, and that's going to keep you safe. Right? These are fantastic mechanisms that help us in the short term. The problem today is that for many of us, our stress responses are not being activated by real danger, right? They're not being activated by lions and predators. For many of us, they're being activated by our daily lives, by our email inboxes, our to-do lists, conflicting demands, 2 parents working, one trying to finish early, go home, pick the kids up, 3 social media channels we're trying to stay on top of, elderly parents who might also be having to look after. The list goes on. But for many of us, those same things, right, are driving the same stress response. And it's problematic because in the short term, those things are really helpful, but in the long term, they're a problem. So your blood sugar going up in the short term to help you run faster, if that's happening day in, day out, right, that's going to lead to excess weight. ultimately type 2 diabetes, just from being stressed. Blood pressure. We know high blood pressure is a big problem. In the short term, a good thing. Running away from a line. If you're in a spinning class at the weekend, you want your blood pressure to rise. That's an appropriate response to a short-term stressor. But day in, day out, if your life is stressing you out, the high blood pressure is going to increase your risk of getting heart attacks, strokes, etc., etc. What about your emotional brain, the amygdala? Right? Again, I said when you're being stressed and you're running away from that lion, it goes on to high alert, so you're hyper-vigilant for all those threats around you. Appropriate in that environment. Appropriate if tonight you're walking down a dark London street and you think someone is trying to attack you, you want to be hyper-vigilant. But if that's happening day in, day out to your life and your email inbox, right? Well, that's one of the things that we call anxiety. You see, all these things in the short term help us, but in the long term, they can be very, very problematic. So as well as those things that actually the stress response switches on, what about some of those things that switches off? Well, as a GP, I can tell you today, even more than 5 years ago, we're seeing more and more cases of low libido. And we're seeing it in younger and younger people. And there are many, many reasons for this. But stress is one of the main drivers. So why would that be? Well, if you are in danger and you are running away from a lion, you don't need to be able to chill out and procreate with your partner. So your body switches it off. Yeah. Gut problems. A survey by Mintel suggested that 80% of the UK population in any given year suffer from at least one gastrointestinal complaint. They are so common. And everyone goes to food as the key driver, and food is clearly a significant player here. But I've got to tell you, stress is an even bigger driver than the food that we're eating. Running away from a lion, the last thing you need to do is be able to digest your food. And how many of us, right, and I include myself in this, are having our healthy lunch while we're also trying to juggle a million things and answer emails at the same time? I'm sure nobody in here dreams of doing anything like that, but certainly that's something we're all faced with. So once you understand what the stress response is, you start to understand how it can affect so many different complaints. Now, I actually contend that it's not that hard to manage the stress of the modern world, okay? It's getting harder and harder, but I think there are some simple strategies, and that's why I wrote my book, The Stress Solution, because I don't think stress is getting the airtime it deserves. I think when we talk about health and well-being, the conversation is dominated with diet and exercise, and of course they're important, but more often than not, stress is the reason why we're choosing the diets and choosing those to be physically inactive. You know, how many people in January want to give up sugar or give up alcohol? Right, it's common. And for a week or two, you know, they might manage it. But then what often happens is that the sugar or the alcohol was there to soothe the stress in your life. So if you don't address the underlying stressor, you're very, very unlikely to change the behavior long term. So look, I cover, in my book, I cover all the simple strategies that you would expect, like breathing, meditation, nature, all kinds of things that absolutely do help, meaning and purpose, and give tips on how you can start to get meaning and purpose in your life. But I want to touch on two areas today that I think aren't spoken about enough of in the context of stress. The first one is loneliness. Okay? So, loneliness is on the rise. Some people say that we're living in a loneliness epidemic. And when we talk about loneliness, we immediately start to think of the elderly. And I understand that. I understand that loneliness affects a lot of the elderly, and it is a problem. But one of the loneliest groups in society are young men between the ages of 30 and 45. And at this age group, tragically, there are growing rates of mental health problems, growing rates of male suicide. In fact, it was just a few days ago, it was National Suicide Prevention Day. And it's a big problem in that age group, and loneliness is a key driver of that. You see, we're living these ultra-connected lives, right? And we say we're more connected than we've ever been before. And sure, in a digital sense, I think that's true. But in terms of real, deep human connection, I don't think we've ever been this isolated. Recent research is suggesting that the feeling of being lonely is as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Does that surprise people? Yeah, most of you nodding your head. So why would that be? Why would the feeling of being lonely be that damaging for you? Well, it all makes sense if you go back a couple of million years ago, right? Back when we were in our hunter-gatherer tribes, if you are by yourself, you're not part of that supportive community, your body's smart. Your body knows that you are vulnerable to attack. So it prepares you for that. It ramps up your immune system. It makes you inflamed. It makes your blood prone to clotting. It does all of these things so that if you do get attacked, you can protect yourself. The problem is now, in this era where we're so busy, we don't have time to see our friends. We don't have time to do the things that mean the world to us and see those people. You know, our bodies are reacting in the same way. It was just last year I had a patient who came to see me, a 37-year-old chap. And on the outside, he was really, really successful. He's running his own business, self-employed, he drove a sports car. You know, you would have thought, hey, this guy's got it all together. He came to see me, and he said, Dr. Chatterjee, look, I'm a bit worried here. I struggle to get out of bed some days. I'm struggling to stay focused at work. I'm really struggling with motivation. And I'm really worried that I've got something called depression. You know, can you help me? So I spent time talking to him, trying to understand what was going on in his life. We did do a few tests and investigations. Everything came back normal. And as I was getting to know him, I realized that actually he was quite lucky in the sense that he lived in a village where he grew up. And he had lots of his friends around him, but he never actually saw them. He was too busy. He said, you know, I see what they're up to on social media. And that's the funny thing about social media, right, isn't it? You can see what your friends are up to. You can see the holiday snaps. You can see where they were last night. You can see what they had for dinner last night, right? But you don't actually see them. And I said to him, look, what I'd love you to try is, for the next 6 weeks, I'd like to see one of your friends at least once a week in person. And when you're with them, I want you to put your phone away. Be really, really present for that interaction. He said, yeah, sure, okay, give that a go. So he goes away. I see him in clinic 6 weeks later, and I ask him, I said, how are you getting on? He said, Dr. Chatterjee, I feel like a different person. I can't tell you the difference it's made. I feel motivated. My self-esteem has improved. I'm more productive at work, and my concentration's better. I said, well, what did you do? Well, he said the first couple of times I played five-a-side football with my friends, which we haven't done in years. But then after that, all we did is on a Sunday morning, we'd go to the local cafe and chew the fat over a latte. So, you know, my question is, did that young lad, well, not a young lad, did that young man have a mental health problem? I mean, he certainly had symptoms that would be consistent with mental health diagnoses, potentially. But was it not that what he really had was a deficiency of friendship in his life? And when he corrected that friendship deficiency, other things started to come back online for him. Now, I'm not trying to say this happens in every single case, right? Medication has a role at times. I do happen to think we are over-medicating people up and down the country with a whole variety of basically lifestyle-driven symptoms. I certainly think that's happening in medicine today. But isn't that powerful? So my question to all of you in here is to ask yourself, when was the last time you saw one of your friends in person? Right? Because I say that seeing your friends in person is not a, how could I put it? It's not a luxury for good health. It's a necessity. And if you haven't got a date in the diary, if you haven't seen them recently, maybe at your coffee break or your lunch break, send them a text. Put a date in the diary. It is good for your health, right? Prioritize it in the same way that you would prioritize eating your vegetables with your dinner. And it's something that I think the modern world, as it steals more and more time away from us, seeing our friends is something that actually, for many of us, falls by the wayside. The other issue I want to talk to you about, which I don't think has been spoken about in the context of stress and well-being, is passion. Right, so the research is pretty clear on this. Regularly doing things that you love makes you more resilient to stress. Right? And we are living in stressful times. So, yes, we would ideally reduce how much stress is in our lives, but that can be challenging. So making ourselves more resilient to stress is a fantastic way of tackling this. Right? So regularly doing things you love makes you more resilient to stress, but it works both ways. Being chronically stressed makes it harder for you to experience pleasure in day-to-day things. Right? Your brain is always responding to the information that you feed it. So, I'll give you another story. 53-year-old chap came into my clinic. Okay? He's the local CFO of a plastics company, very successful job. And again, he's concerned that he might have depression. He says, Dr. Chatterjee, I just feel indifferent. I just can't get going. I don't have time to do the things I want to do. I'm just disinterested in my job, in my work, in my family life. Is this depression? So I started to ask him about his life. What's going on? So you've been married for 20 years. Okay, how's your marriage? Yeah, so. I don't really see my wife that much, but things are okay. He was very, very indifferent about it. So what about work? You've got a good job. Do you enjoy it? Not really. Pays the bills. I've got to do it. Puts a roof over our heads. I said, do you do anything that you love? What do you do as sort of recreation? I said, Doc, I don't have time for that. I'm busy. So what about weekends? Weekends, I've got the household chores to do. I've got to take the kids to sports classes. I don't have time. So, again, I did what is appropriate of me as a GP to sort of check other aspects of his life. But then I started to really push him on this passion piece. I said, did you ever have any hobbies? I said, Doctor, I used to have hobbies, yeah. As a teenager, I used to love train sets. I used to play with them loads. I said, okay, do you have a train set at home? He says, yeah, well, I've got one at home, but it's in the loft. I said, okay, look, what I'd love you to do tonight is when you get home, is get your train set out. I appreciate that may not be the advice that he was expecting to get from his GP, but nonetheless, that's the advice I gave him. Then he goes away, and I get on with my day. And as typically happens in general practice, you cannot follow up every single patient that you see. We see sometimes 40 to 50 patients a day. You cannot follow them all up. So I hadn't seen him for a while. 3 months later, I finished my morning surgery. I was in the car park, about to go out to do my home visits, and I bumped into his wife, and I said, hey, look, how's your husband getting on? I said, oh my God, Dr. Chatterjee, I feel like I've got the guy I married back again. I said, well, what's been going on? He said, well, I come home from work, and he comes home from work, and he's straight away playing around on his toy set. He's on eBay buying collector's items, and he's subscribed to this magazine now, and he's just so happy. Now, I didn't see him for another 3 months when he came in for a well-man's check, and he came in to see me with his blood results. And I remember him coming in, and I said, hey, look, how are you getting on? He says, Doc, I cannot tell you the difference. Things are so much better. I love that train set. And I said, what about, how's your marriage? He goes, things with my wife are much, much better. I said, how's this job that you weren't enjoying? He goes, love it. Really, really enjoy my work. And the point I'm trying to make there is that, did he have a mental health problem? Again, he had symptoms that were consistent, right? You could make some sort of diagnosis there if you wanted to, potentially. But I'm just trying to make the case that he probably had a deficiency of passion in his life, right? And when he corrected his deficiency of passion, things started to come back online. So again, my request to each and every single one of you is, when was the last time you did something that you absolutely love? If it's recently, great. If it's not, I'd love you to think about giving regular doses of passion the same priority that you would go to the gym or moving your body. It's as important, yet we don't feel we've got time for it. If you think you don't have time, even 5 minutes a day. We've all got 5 minutes a day. It could be reading a book, going for a walk, listening to a podcast, coming home from work, putting on YouTube and watching your favorite comedian for 5 minutes. It doesn't matter, but a daily dose of pleasure and passion is super important. There are so many other things we could talk about when it comes to stress, but I really want to touch on those two things because I don't think we're talking about them enough, and I think they're important. But I just want to leave you with this. Stress does not take a day off in the 21st century, so I don't think we can take a day off from managing stress. I think we all need a stress reduction strategy these days. I really do. And what we don't realize is that stress is everywhere. Okay? Just because we can't see it like we can see the food on our plate doesn't mean it's not there. It is there. It affects our short-term health and our long-term health. I mean, the research is now suggesting that chronic stress is a causative factor in the development of Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's doesn't happen overnight. Alzheimer's starts about 30 years before you get it in your brain. I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying that to empower you so that you actually take this seriously and start doing simple things each day that really make a difference. I promise you, once you make managing stress a daily priority, not only will your stress levels come down, but you're going to start feeling calmer, happier, and I think you'll start to lead a much more fulfilling life. And what could be better than that?
Oxygen is the most important molecule we've got, right? It's like in terms of for energy, right? Maybe it's not the most important. It's the thing that's allowing us to exist, right? In the manner that we are. 500 million years ago, multicellular organisms figured out how to use oxygen for fuel, and thus aerobic metabolism began. The evolution has continued for that long, right? So going on that timeline and seeing that, we have not turned back from the most efficient way to produce energy, which is aerobically and bringing oxygen into the system. And that's what the design of the inhale of our lungs does, is it brings oxygen in the system. The only way to make that oxygen available, though, is another thing, another gas, right? That's carbon dioxide. And so the carbon dioxide is a response to a hostile environment, I guess you could call it. And that's what this planet was right before multicellular organisms figured out everything, right? And then a little algae figured out how to convert sunlight into energy and convert the sunlight and the byproduct of that became oxygen, right? And so the planet got engulfed in algae, and this is a gross basic overview of some serious stuff that people have done real work on, right? But that's toxic environment left for anaerobic metabolism, primarily in single cell organisms, to work. Now, not all single cell organisms will function off of anaerobic metabolism, but it is a default system that we use. And they work congruently in our system, right? So when I don't have enough oxygen present, right, being used, my body will it instantly, beautifully starts to switch over to this anaerobic system. So if there's not enough oxygen present in something, we default to another energy system, and that would be the anaerobic system, right? And so using more sugar and glucose for energy, because the brain and the nervous system actually require glucose as its only source of fuel, right? And this is 20% of the energy we use, right? So as I inhale, I draw oxygen in, it enters the bloodstream, it goes to the bloodstream, then the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cell, the organelles of the cells, go to work and use the oxygen. The only way for that oxygen to come off the red blood cell through blood is by carbon dioxide replacing that molecule in the red blood cell. And so I need to have enough carbon dioxide present in order to make the environment, let's call it perfect, for oxygen to work. Now, we're doing this in a very regulated way. all day long, 26,000 breaths, right? You're using oxygen predominantly, but how much are we using that oxygen? And that starts to show up in things like, if we look at respiration rate, well, like the Buteyko method, I think the Buteyko folks believe, and this is a method that was designed by Konstantin Buteyko out of Russia, the former Soviet Union, that 80% of the population roughly chronically hyperventilates, which means they're overbreathing. And so when I overbreathe, when I breathe, have a high respiration rate, I'm actually blowing off or getting rid of more carbon dioxide than probably necessary. So hyperventilation becomes a stress reaction, right? A higher stress reaction, I breathe more. Think of working out. You start running, your respiration rate, you start to breathe more frequently, right?
Yeah.
Stress is the same thing. If I'm sitting here and you're stressing me out in any way, shape, or form, my respiration rate will tend to follow if I am stressed out, unless I'm actually aware of this. This is where consciousness and awareness have a game or a play, right? So where I can take volitional control over my breathing and manage that, or train that in a way to bring me back to a place to where I'm actually using that oxygen. And this is also known as the Bohr effect to a large degree, is having enough acid in the environment in order for the oxygen to be used. And so that's why breath control becomes such a big player in things, is I can actually optimize myself to use more oxygen.
Yeah, I mean, it's super incredible. And, in the morning of your Arts and Breath clinic course, I don't know what you call it, yesterday, it was really great to understand that of course we need oxygen. We know we need oxygen, but actually, in order for that oxygen to come off and do the magic that we want it to do in our body, we need enough CO2, carbon dioxide, but we have become a carbon dioxide intolerant society.
Yes.
80% of us potentially are overbreathing, which means we're blowing off too much carbon dioxide. So yes, the breathing is, we want oxygen, but without enough carbon dioxide, we can't use it.
Yeah.
And I say when I talk to people, and it's how I wrote about breathing in the stress solution, was about breathing is information. Breathing is information for your body. The way you breathe will give your brain information. Are you in danger or are you safe? And I say to some people, look, when you are on deadlines and you have 10 emails to get back to you and a few projects to finish, you are probably changing your breathing without realizing it. You are probably breathing more from your chest and your diaphragm. You're probably speeding up your rate. And that is sending information to your brain. That is, again, is like a vicious cycle. And I love that test you guys do with your students, the CO2 tolerance test.
Yeah.
Which I found super, super interesting. So I wonder if you just unpack that for,
Yeah.
maybe laymen who might be listening to this. What does it mean to be CO2 intolerant or carbon dioxide intolerant?
Yeah. So we're currently working on defining this. And a lot of the work Rob does, who is my partner in this with the Art of Breath, and who's my counterpart in what we do, has come up with a term that I think is probably going to take off. And that is what this is: psychometabolic reactivity. And so
snappy.
Yeah, isn't it?
I love it.
But
I do actually.
Yeah. Well, I look at this as how well we're willing to optimize this. So psychometabolic optimization, and how you react to what is the metabolic waste product of energy. That is CO2. So it comes down to our relationship to CO2. And so we'll take this to when you were swimming and you went into that panic attack and, not seeing the bottom of the floor of the ocean anymore, and you went into an override. I can guarantee you, based on our work, now we'd have to prove this, but we're currently have plenty of research starting to show this, that your CO2 tolerance hit the floor when that happened. Meaning there was elevated levels of CO2 and you started to react to that because of the context of the story and what was going on.
Hold on. So let's go through that. So I was swimming.
Yeah.
Okay. No problem.
Higher levels of CO2 because of work.
Okay, so I was working, and therefore I'm starting to build up carbon dioxide in my blood.
That's why your respiration rate went up.
So everything goes up to, and this presumably will happen if someone's running or anything that they're doing.
Yes, correct.
So, but then I hit a point where I got scared.
Yep.
So I've already got raised levels of CO2. So I'm hyperventilating I'm assuming to get rid of that CO2.
You got it. You literally, so the only time that you don't react to anything with your breath is when you're dead. Your brainstem is online. It's a part of everything you're going to do. So you're going to react in any instance to your environment, to what your perception is. Hearing, smelling, seeing, taste, touch, right? So your 5 senses are here by design to help with all of this and signal even to that respiration pattern, what I need to do based on how I need to optimize myself, self-regulate, right? Well, my thinking's off. So self-regulation right now, I'm responding to the CO2 that's in my blood. Now, it didn't need to be that high. Your CO2 did not need to be that high. You could have dropped that with, like, if you're like, let's say you hate flying. Like I'm not a big fan of flying. I've gotten good at it, right? Because I've done work at it, right? Yeah. Control your breathing while you're doing it so that when things start to shake or start to do things and you think the plane's going to go down or whatever, that's just a story. Like that's really just a story. And so it's the context. And so now I'm responding through the limit, like these emotions that are happening through this story, right? And my respiration center responds to that. So controlling my breathing allows me to manage the carbon dioxide. And what happens in a panic situation? What's one of the things we do for people when they're freaking out? And
brown paper bag.
Bingo. Brown paper bag on the face, breathe into it.
So what's going on there?
CO2 is you're rebreathing. You're actually using more of the oxygen that you've got. Right?
So just unpack that for people listening to this. You're having a panic attack, you're over breathing.
Yeah.
So you're blowing off a lot of carbon dioxide.
Yeah. So remember what I said about how we default into, so we have an aerobic system or we default into anaerobic. Yeah. What happens when we don't have enough carbon dioxide in the environment?
We're not able to utilize any oxygen that we have. We're not able to get that
What does
off.
the brain need to function?
Oxygen.
Boom.
So suddenly we don't have enough oxygen. So what is the brown paper bag doing?
It's recirculating the carbon dioxide that you're rebreathing. It's basically a rebreather.
So you're putting more carbon dioxide back in.
You couldn't breathe into this bag for 5 minutes. It's just a few breaths, right? But you're rebreathing and you're basically tricking the brain.
Yeah.
And Dr. Justin Feinstein out of Oklahoma is doing work on bolus hits right now of carbon dioxide with super high anxiety patients. Yeah. And having insane results, like people getting one hit and just like this freak out mode thing happens. But because it doesn't happen in these successive breaths, that people regulate and the brain and you calm down and you're like, oh, this isn't as bad as I think it is. And I'm able to control this.
So if I was trained, had I been trained at that point in breathing and done a bit of practice and been in the ocean before, in theory, are you saying that I could have switched off that hyperactive stress response that was going on in my body? I could have actually switched it off, maintained control, maintained calm, and carried on swimming.
That is where choice enters the situation and choice of breath. I choose to breathe and control my breathing right now. Now I need to choose and change my narrative because I'm now exacerbating a situation that is counter to what I want to be going on. I'm freaking out. There's no need for me to freak out. I am not in imminent death. And if I am freaking out, then get the fuck out of there, or excuse me, but get out of there. Yeah. Like, right? If it's truly a freak out, or if you want to participate in this and change how your brain works, plasticity, lay back on your back and control your breathing until you can calm it down. Yeah. If you're in the water and you're in a wetsuit, you're going to float. Yeah. Trust me, you're not going to sink. Yeah. There's a reason why freedivers need a weight belt to go down, right? Yeah. Like so.
Even that. So I've sort of tried to dissect what happened. And I think for me, there's so many reasons why I freaked out. One, I never wore a wetsuit before. I didn't even know
you absolutely broke every rule of like going into a competition for the first time or doing something.
Yeah,
right?
I never worn a wetsuit before. I didn't trust the guy next to me said, look, Rangan, just lie on your back and you'll float. I thought there is no way I'm lying on my back at the moment. I am going to sink. So I didn't know that. The water was cold. And if we have time, we could maybe explore what that cold does to people. And yeah, sure, I hadn't been in the ocean before. So all these factors together, it's like almost like a perfect storm. Like I would probably have had to do a lot of training to...
But the fact that you unpack it like that, like you're able to do that, like, look, so what does this mean for Rangan? What does this mean? Like, oh, I tend to overpack, put things like jump onto things and do everything for okay, maybe I should start dissecting that a little bit further back in my life, when that started, how that started, why that started, and for Brian, especially like, I think it really comes down to a lot of the relationships and things that we've done. And so I look at like my childhood and it was like, I was rebellious, man. I got attention. I got love because I rebelled. Like, I got attention when I was rebellious. Hence, look at me. Like when I've got my shirt off and I'm in short sleeves, I'm covered in tattoos. I grew up in an environment that was very rebellious. I looked up to people that were punk rock. It was like this whole thing and it garnered me attention. So I felt love that way. So that then transcended into aggression and what that meant. And this is my default for survival. Like, so I tend to overdo things, right? And be, I'm going to do this. I'm responsible for everything, like it just.
And we think that's our personality.
It's not who we are.
Exactly. And I sort of, Gabor Mate, I spoke to him a few months ago. Do you know Gabor's work?
I do.
Yeah. I love Gabor's work. I think he talks with such compassion.
What's it, Telling Ghosts? Or
Hungry Ghosts.
Hungry Ghosts, yeah.
Yeah,
I read
one of the funnest conversations I've had on the show for sure. And he talks about how we use language and how that determines a lot of the way we think we are and what we think is our personality. But we could go down a big rabbit hole right here if we want to. I'm going to pull us back to the breath because I'm keen that people listening to this who think, okay, look, I get it, guys. I get it. Breathing's important. Somebody listens to this who has not a clue how to start.
Yeah,
right.
I got a simple solution for that.
Well, let's dive right in.
Well, we all have apps on our phones. We designed an actual app based off the work we've done. And what we saw was that not everybody responds to the same patterns in the same ways because our physiology and thinking and emotions aren't always in the same place, right? Like you deal with things very differently than I deal with things. That would make sense, right? Like if we were training for the same event, we could follow the same training program, but we're probably not going to get the same results because you've got asymmetries I don't. Your physiology is starting off in a place mine isn't, right? Like all of these things are variant, right? So we saw pretty early on that people responded very differently. So we learned how to put what patterns work with kind of specific ways of dealing with things emotionally, right? And so we based these algorithm off of how people emotionally handle stress and their CO2 tolerance test. And so it starts people off and it gives them the state app, starts off by taking people through this test and it gives you 4 exercises to do. And there's one for feeling alert, which is waking up in the morning. There's one for being present, which is maybe throughout the day. There's one for feeling calm, which is whenever you need to feel like you're calm. And then there's one for which most of us are dealing with is to help you fall asleep, to downshift you big time. So there's 2 on the end that are kind of really important about downshifting and something we need to take more into account in our lives, because that's the thing we're not doing. Is it's not that like stress isn't the problem. We need to lean into stress. We need to understand that it's what we're doing between stressors. Like, so we're going to have had this conversation for, 90 minutes or 2 hours. Right. And it's like, when I get out of here, I'm going to get in a car. I'm going to do I'll probably do a few breathing exercises as I do, because I'll just come down a little bit and then I can hop back on a phone call and do things again. And, regulate, I can process what we did and then I can move on to the next thing. And that's the thing we're not doing, is we're not processing these things. We're not actually going through the process. We're just jumping from one exposure to the next. And so that's what the app is really designed to do. And it's like, hey, here's 4 exercises you can do that are actually customized to you. So your app is very different from my app and very different from Rob's app. And it changes and evolves with you based on how you respond to carbon dioxide. Because when you can actually get better at these patterns, you're increasing your tolerance to CO2, which only means you're creating more room and the ability to shift down or up in an instant.
On the whole point of CO2 tolerance.
Yep.
In that incident, when I was in the water, when I was panicking.
Yeah.
You said that actually my CO tolerance changed, or I was at that point intolerant to CO2, so I'm breathing fast to blow it off. Is that an acute thing that happens? Or had I been training my breathing consistently and I had raised my tolerance to CO2 on a consistent basis, would I not have felt that intolerant to it in that incident, in that particular moment? Does that make sense?
At that particular moment, most likely, maybe a little bit further down the swim, you may have, because it may have required more work or more storytelling, negative thinking in order to exacerbate it, right? What we're doing is pushing that envelope, like we're building that gap of choice, right? Like that, you got stimulus and response. You're building a bigger area for just going, I'm cool. I know if I continue to push this a little bit harder, I've got a problem. But here's the thing: is you are combining emotions with work, right? And it's not that we're not doing this when we're training or working out, but we're not doing it in that context where I'm exposing myself to an environment. But the thing is it should be an acute response. It should be. It should not be chronic. And this is where we start to see long-term, like chronic stuff, like being emotional and not dealing with the stuff that we should be dealing with, like at the heart of it, when we, like victimizing ourselves. This inevitably does not deal with things like, I'm not at fault, I don't have any play in this. Well, if you're thinking about it, you've got plenty of play in it. I hate to break it to you. All right. So understanding that there is that thing there, your emotional, having stress to emotion will hold on to a lower so it'll affect your CO2 tolerance more than physically affecting. Remember how we did the test after we worked out and your CO2 tolerance test plummeted? Then we did the breathing exercises and it should have gone up. Yeah. And we saw a lot of people in that room where for the 4th CO2 tolerance of the day, granted, the first 2 were done when we weren't even working, right? We weren't even really doing any real work. The 4th one, after you'd done 2 workouts, was the best for a lot of people in that room, right? And that's the power of what breath can do, is it can change that CO2, and people felt calmer. Yeah. The whole room looked like it was just docile after we did that.
It was so amazing that those sort of 5-10 minutes at the end where everyone had just done this down-regulating breathing pattern, you could just feel the energy. It was just chill. Yeah. It just felt calm, and it was amazing. And
4 minutes of breathing. That was it. 4 minutes of breathing.
And 4. I just thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to feel this way at one point in the day, at least every single day? But with that, you absolutely can. You mentioned the breathing practices make that space in between stimulus and response bigger. Mm-hmm. Is there anything in life that is more important, that is going to have more impact on your well-being, on the well-being of people around you, than actually making that space big?
I don't know if there would be anything else.
I don't think there could be, because that is what gets us into trouble in our life, whether we make poor choices, whether we fall out with our wife or our husband, or we shout at our kids.
And even this is not new. This is old thinking. I mean, look, Bruce Lee literally conceptualized and brought the idea of self-actualization. That is that. If you don't build that gap of actualization, you're just a reactive species in an environment that is chaotic.
And you give your power to other people. You
100%. I know way too many people that are running around pretending to be happy thinking happiness is the key to everything. And happiness is, in my opinion, is not. It's contentment. You got to understand, and this is my buddy Fergus Conley and I talk about this all the time. And this is the big problem with what we're doing right now is everybody's chasing happiness.
Yeah.
Fuck happiness. Like, they're going to have times where things are tough, but you should have the tools to understand that gap. And that, hey, you know what? This too shall pass. Like this, I have the tools in order to manage this stressful situation. Like I'm going through something with my wife that like I've got to have the tools. Like I'm in an argument and it got bad and bad and bad. And I'm just, this is like just making this up. But it's like, hey, I've seen this with people all over the place. And it's like, does this need to be this bad? No, it doesn't. It does not. And if you actually reflect on yourself and use breathing to actually control that response to what's going on, that psychometabolic reactivity becomes optimized. And you start to actually work through, hey, I can actually, this isn't, rebellious Brian is just an identity. Yeah. Bingo. That is not me. That was just who I thought I was. I am actually much more than that. And I have the ability to choose how I am. I'm not anywhere near the rebellious person I was. Now, there's aspects of me that's pretty rebellious, going and getting out of a cage with sharks and, but those are experiences, and these are things that I want to be able to go and do and that's what living is. That's life.
If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy the one I had with the former monk, Jay Shetty, on the simple things that you can do to train your mind. It's right there. Give it a listen and let me know what you think.
The monk mindset is about pursuing your truest goals, your truest self, and your most authentic, aligned goals.